The castle of Eldoria stretched high into the clouds, its towers sharp like the fangs of some ancient beast. The walls whispered secrets of kings long gone, of battles fought and blood spilled, and of the darkness that lingered in the royal bloodline. In the midst of this grandeur, Elara felt trapped. She had never wanted this life, yet here she was, dressed in a gown heavy with jewels and silks, standing at the edge of a destiny forced upon her. Her stepmother, Lady Seraphine, had insisted on this marriage. "A union with the Alpha King will secure your place," she had said, her eyes cold as winter frost. But Elara knew better. Lady Seraphine wanted control over Eldoria, and she would use her stepdaughter like a pawn in a game of power and ambition. The Alpha King, Varian, was a man feared across the kingdom. Tales of his cruelty were whispered even in distant villages, but so were stories of his brilliance. His body bore the marks of an accident in his youth, leaving him with a limp and one arm weaker than the other. Yet, those who met him quickly learned that his disability made him sharper, not weaker. Every movement, every word, every glance carried the weight of authority. Elara's heart pounded as she stepped through the castle gates, the banners of Eldoria fluttering above her. The people bowed as she passed, some with curiosity, others with envy. She clutched the edge of her cloak, trying to steady herself. The air smelled of old stone, burning torches, and the faint tang of magic that seemed to hum through the castle walls. The throne room was a cavern of shadows and gold. Tall columns rose like trees of iron, and tapestries depicting past kings and battles lined the walls. At the far end, seated on a throne carved from blackened oak, was Varian. Even seated, his presence dominated the room. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the hall with an intensity that made many bend their heads. When his gaze fell on her, Elara felt a chill run down her spine. He was not as she had imagined. There was no immediate threat of cruelty, no overt display of strength. Instead, there was an unsettling stillness. A power that radiated not from muscle, but from the control he held over everything in the room. He rose slowly, using a carved walking staff for balance, his one strong arm gripping it with calm authority. Each step echoed, measured, and precise. "Welcome, Lady Elara," he said, his voice low and commanding. "You are to be my wife. You may rise from fear, or you may learn to bow." Elara swallowed hard. She had expected him to be terrifying, but there was something in his words that struck her differently. They were not cruel. They were matter of fact, like the turning of the seasons. Fear and fascination mingled in her chest. The wedding itself was a spectacle of gold and candlelight. Nobles whispered in corners, some admiring her beauty, others murmuring doubts about the union. She noticed the way Varian observed them all, his eyes like twin blades cutting through pretense and lies. Even the courtiers who dared to snicker or sneer fell silent under his gaze. Elara's steps were careful as she approached the throne for the formal vows. Her heart raced. She wanted to run. Yet the doors of the castle seemed impossibly far, and the walls of obligation pressed in around her. When she knelt before him, Varian extended his hand. It was not a hand of rough command, nor one of tenderness. It was steady, firm, and impossibly sure. "You are bound to me now," he said quietly, "but not merely by duty. Understand this. The world will try to twist you, to test you. Survive that, and you will see what power truly is." The ceremony ended with a sense of weight pressing down on her shoulders. Elara was no longer free. She had been thrust into a life she had not chosen, beside a man who was as enigmatic as he was feared. The guests departed, leaving the two of them alone in the candlelit halls, where shadows danced like silent watchers. Varian led her to her chamber, a room filled with tapestries of past queens, their faces frozen in expressions of sorrow and resolve. The fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across the walls. He did not speak as they entered. Instead, he simply gestured toward a chair, and she obeyed, feeling the tension in her limbs. Finally, he spoke, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "You have seen me as a king," he said. "But there is more to this life than the throne, and more to me than the stories you have heard." Elara met his gaze, uncertain. I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You will," Varian replied. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate. "The night is long, Lady Elara, and it has a way of revealing truth. What I do tonight is not what others expect. You must see the man, not the legend, if you are to survive this marriage, if you are to see the world as it truly is." Elara felt her pulse quicken. She had expected fear, perhaps even anger. But there was something else, a promise of understanding, of revelation, hidden behind his commanding presence. It was not comfort, but it was compelling. Hours passed in quiet conversation, the kind that unwraps layers of thought and fear. Varian spoke of the burdens of the crown, of betrayal by those he trusted, and of the isolation that came with power. He did not ask for pity, nor did he demand admiration. He simply revealed the truths he had carried alone. For the first time, Elara saw the cracks in the king's armor. His disability, his solitude, his sharp mind, all combined to create a man who was not to be feared, but understood. She began to realize that her own fears were shadows of the stories her stepmother had told her, of the legends of cruelty, of the imagined tyranny. When the first light of dawn crept through the high windows, Elara felt a strange calm. The fear that had pressed on her chest all day had loosened, replaced by something unfamiliar. Curiosity, awe, and a cautious admiration. She had stepped into the life she had not chosen. But perhaps, in this castle of shadows and gold, she might find a path she had never imagined. Before leaving her chamber, Varian placed his hand on hers. The touch was light, yet it carried weight, as if the very air around them recognized its significance. "You are mine now," he said again, "but not in the way they think. Tonight is only the beginning." Ilara's heart raced at his words. The room seemed smaller, the shadows longer, and the world outside the castle walls quieter. She did not fully understand what he meant, but she knew that the life she had dreaded had taken a turn she could not have foreseen. As she watched him leave, she felt an unshakable awareness. This marriage was not just a binding of duty, but the start of a journey neither of them could predict. A journey of power, of secrets, and of a strange, undeniable connection. And in the silence that followed, Elara whispered to herself, a mixture of fear and hope threading her voice, "I do not know what he will do, but I will see it." The castle seemed to breathe around her, alive with the weight of past kings, with whispered promises, and with the tension of a night that had only begun. And somewhere, in the heart of Eldoria, a legend was quietly taking shape, not of tyranny, not of cruelty, but of two souls bound by fate, darkness, and the possibility of redemption. The dawn broke over Eldoria like molten gold spilling across the towers. But Elara could not find peace. Sleep had eluded her, replaced by the echo of Varian's words from the previous night. "You are mine now, but not in the way they think." Those words hummed in her mind like a silent drum, a promise and a warning all at once. The castle had changed in the quiet of morning. Shadows clung to the corners of the halls, and the air smelled of stone and distant fires. Elara walked slowly, her steps cautious, her mind racing with thoughts she did not dare voice. She knew she was not merely a queen by title. She had become part of a kingdom steeped in danger, secrets, and power that was as invisible as it was unyielding. Varian's presence was everywhere. The courtiers whispered about him with a mix of fear and admiration. Some doubted his strength because of his disability. Others respected the cunning that allowed him to control not only Eldoria, but the hearts of those within it. Elara, once fearful, began to see the depth of his influence. He ruled not through brute force, but through strategy, presence, and intelligence. Her first day as queen-in-waiting was a trial. Advisors and nobles presented her with matters of the court disputes over land, taxes, and ancient grievances. Elara felt overwhelmed at first, but she noticed how Varian had prepared everything for her. He had left notes, subtle instructions, and hints that guided her without overtly telling her what to do. There was a method in his teaching, a quiet way of shaping her into someone who could stand beside him, not behind him. During a meeting with the royal council, a minor dispute arose between two lords. Elara watched them argue, and instinctively, she tried to intervene, but her words stumbled and faltered. Varian, standing silently behind her, stepped forward. He raised his hand, not in threat, but in command. The lords immediately fell silent, their egos checked by the weight of his presence. "Elara," he said quietly, almost to her alone. "Sometimes, strength is quiet. Words carry more power when they are measured, not shouted." She looked at him, her chest tightening. There was no condescension in his voice, only patience and instruction. Slowly, she began to understand that his power was not in what he could do with his arms or legs, but in the way he commanded the world with his mind and presence. As days passed, Ilara's feelings became more complicated. She found herself observing Varian in private moments, how he listened more than he spoke, how he could read the smallest gesture or expression and understand the truth behind it. His disability, once the source of her fear and the court's whispers, seemed to magnify his intelligence rather than diminish it. One evening, the castle bell tolled the hour for the evening meal. Elara entered the grand dining hall, her heart still unsettled by the growing tension she could not name. The hall was filled with nobles, yet all eyes seemed to follow Varian. He moved carefully to the head of the table, using his staff, yet the air around him pulsed with quiet authority. Elara sat beside him, feeling the heat of whispered curiosity from the surrounding courtiers. For a long moment, she simply watched him. Then, as if sensing her thoughts, Varian spoke in a low, intimate tone. "Do you feel it?" he asked. She blinked, uncertain. "Feel what?" "The weight of this kingdom, the expectations, the eyes that watch and judge. It is not the throne that burdens you. It is the fear of failing in the eyes of others." Elara swallowed hard. His words mirrored her own unease. For the first time, she realized that he understood her not as a pawn, not as a bride, but as a person. Their conversations became the quiet moments of her day, moments that bridged fear and fascination. Varian shared fragments of his past, the betrayals that had left him cautious. The battles fought not only with swords, but with lies and manipulation, and the curse that had long shadowed his family. He did not dwell on self-pity. Instead, he spoke with the clarity of someone who had endured much and emerged sharper, wiser, and more resolute. One night, she found herself wandering the castle gardens, unable to sleep. The moon bathed the flowers and fountains in silver light, turning the air cool and alive. She barely noticed when Varian appeared at the far end of the path, his figure outlined by the pale glow. "You should not wander alone," he said quietly, his staff tapping lightly against the stones. I cannot rest," Elara admitted. "I keep thinking of everything I do not understand, everything I cannot control." He stepped closer, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Control is an illusion, Lady Elara. The world bends to those who understand its rules, not those who try to dominate it. You have more strength than you know, but you have yet to see it in yourself." Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask him how he could be so sure, how he could see her so clearly, but the words lodged in her throat, caught between fear and fascination. Varian extended his hand, not as a king commanding a subject, but as a man offering guidance. "Come," he said. "Let me show you something few ever see." He led her through winding paths and stone corridors until they reached a secluded courtyard, a place where the air seemed untouched by politics or expectation. There, Varian demonstrated how he studied the world, how he could read people, predict their movements, and understand their motives without lifting a sword. Every motion, every word, every glance was a lesson in perception, patience, and power. Alara listened, her heart both racing and settling. She began to see the truth of him, that his disability did not diminish him, but refined him, shaping a mind capable of understanding depths most would never reach. Days turned into weeks, and Alara's perception of Varian shifted. The fear she had carried began to transform into a cautious respect, then into fascination, and eventually into something deeper she did not yet name. She began to anticipate his guidance, to notice the subtle ways he spoke through silence, and to feel the tension in the air whenever he was near. Yet the court remained a dangerous place. Whispers of rebellion, envy, and fear never ceased. One day, a nobleman, emboldened by gossip, challenged her authority in the council. Alara felt the panic rising. But before she could falter, Varian's presence swept through the hall like a shadow of steel. He did not raise his voice, nor did he strike fear with anger. He simply spoke a few measured words, and the nobleman was silenced, not by threat, but by the undeniable force of his intellect and presence. Alara felt a shiver of awe. She was beginning to understand that his power was not in what he could do physically, but in what he made others believe they could not do. His mind was a blade, and she had begun to learn its shape. That night, she found herself alone in her chambers, staring at the flickering candlelight. Thoughts of Varian's words, his lessons, and his quiet strength filled her mind. She felt a strange pull, an unspoken bond that both thrilled and terrified her. She did not yet understand it, but she sensed its inevitability. A soft knock at her door startled her. Before she could speak, Varian entered, silent as a shadow. He held no weapon, no staff, only himself, and a gaze that seemed to pierce through the walls of the castle and into her very soul. "You are learning," he said simply. "Not because I teach you, but because you are seeing. Strength is not given, it is discovered, nurtured, and claimed. The kingdom, the crown, the fear, they will all bend to those who understand themselves." Alara's heart pounded. She wanted to ask him what he meant, to demand answers, but the words escaped her. Instead, she simply nodded, feeling the weight of his presence, the intensity of his gaze, and the unspoken truth that this journey was only beginning. As Varian left, he turned back once, his voice low and intimate. "The night comes for revelation, Lady Alara. What I show you then will change everything you think you know." Alone again, Alara felt both anticipation and fear. The castle seemed alive, the shadows deeper, the corridors longer. She understood that the life she had dreaded was transforming into something far greater, far more complex, and far more dangerous than she could have imagined. And somewhere, in the quiet of her heart, she realized that the Alpha King, feared and misunderstood by all, had begun to awaken something within her, something that neither duty nor fear could contain. The journey of power, trust, and unexpected connection had begun, and neither of them could foresee where it would lead. The days in Eldoria passed like a slow river, heavy with heat and tension. Alara had begun to settle into the rhythm of the castle, yet every corner still whispered secrets and hidden dangers. The Alpha King, Varian, moved through the halls with quiet authority, his presence both a comfort and a weight that pressed upon her chest. She had learned to anticipate his instructions, to follow the subtle cues in his gaze, and to understand that his mind worked on levels few could ever grasp. It was during one such morning, as the sun cut through the mist over the eastern battlements, that Alara realized how much she had changed. She had begun to command the respect of the council, using the lessons Varian had taught her. She spoke with calm clarity, offering solutions that were measured and wise, and the nobles began to see her not as a frightened bride, but as a partner in the rule of Eldoria. Varian watched her from the shadows of the throne room, his one strong arm resting lightly on his staff. He said nothing, but his eyes followed her every movement, noting her posture, the way she spoke, and the subtle confidence she had begun to exude. There was pride in his gaze, though it was tempered by caution. He knew the world outside the castle walls was never kind, and he had seen power stripped from those who were unprepared. The tranquility of the morning was broken by the arrival of a messenger. The man, dressed in the colors of a neighboring duchy, bowed low before the king. "Your Majesty." "Troubling news," he said. "There has been a rebellion in the western lands. They claim that the king is weak, that his rule is faltering. They march with banners raised and soldiers gathered." Varian's eyes darkened, and a tense silence fell over the room. "And how many?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying a sharp edge. "Thousands, sire," the messenger replied. "They believe your condition makes you vulnerable." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. Thousands of soldiers, armed and ready, believing the Alpha King to be weak. She glanced at Varian, expecting fear, but instead, she saw calculation. He did not falter, did not flinch. His disability, the thing she had once thought a limitation, seemed to vanish in the presence of his mind's command. "We cannot underestimate them," Varian said, his tone steady. "Prepare the defenses. I want every gate watched, every path secured, and every ally accounted for." He paused, and his gaze found Ilara's. "You will come with me to the War Council. You must see how the world bends for those who understand it." The journey to the War Council was a tense one. Soldiers and advisors whispered as Ilara passed, some with curiosity, some with doubt. Yet she held her head high, drawing on the lessons Varian had taught her. She began to see that her fear of the court, her fear of him, was transforming into understanding, into recognition of the strength hidden beneath his calm exterior. In the War Council, maps of the kingdom were spread across the stone table. Varian studied them with a meticulous eye, tracing the paths of enemy movements, calculating the timing of reinforcements, and anticipating the strategies of those who sought to challenge him. Ilara watched, absorbing the logic and foresight that shaped every decision. "You see," Varian said quietly, sensing her gaze, "strength is not about arms alone. It is about understanding the heart of the battle, the fears and ambitions of those who stand against you." Ilara nodded, her mind racing. She began to offer insights, small suggestions at first, then more confident recommendations. Varian listened, and when her ideas proved useful, he acknowledged them with a slight nod, a gesture that sent a rush of pride through her. As the day stretched into evening, the castle prepared for the coming threat. Soldiers drilled, guards patrolled, and every corner of Eldoria seemed alive with anticipation. Yet amidst the preparations, Ilara found herself drawn to the quieter moments. Moments when she could observe Varian without the pressure of court or rebellion. One such moment came in the castle gardens, under the silver glow of the moon. The air was cool and fragrant, the fountains reflecting the light like pools of liquid stars. Varian stood beside her, silent, watching the shadows dance across the cobblestones. "You have changed," he said finally, his voice soft but carrying the weight of observation. "You are no longer the girl who entered this castle in fear. You are learning to see, to understand, to wield influence in ways most never do." Ilara felt a flush of warmth. "I could not have done it without you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have shown me what to see, and how to stand." Rever one. Varian's gaze lingered on her, unflinching. And yet, he said, there is more to see, more to learn. Fear, desire, loyalty. They all play a part. You must understand them, not just in others, but in yourself. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Elara's heart raced as she felt the tension, the unspoken connection that seemed to pulse in the air around them. She realized that this was not merely a marriage of duty. There was something deeper, something neither of them could yet name, binding them together in ways both powerful and fragile. The next day brought a new test. A messenger arrived from a distant part of the kingdom, bearing a message sealed with the mark of the Alpha King's rival, a powerful noble who had once sought the throne for himself. The message was a challenge, thinly veiled with threats of rebellion and betrayal. Varian read it silently, his eyes narrowing. They believe they can manipulate fear, he said, folding the letter carefully. They do not understand that strength is measured not in terror, but in control. He turned to Elara, his gaze intense. You will learn, in time, that the world bends to those who understand it. And you are beginning to see it already. Elara felt a surge of determination. She had come to realize that her own fear was a shadow, a barrier she could overcome with understanding, observation, and courage. She would not be a pawn. She would be a partner, learning the ways of power and influence alongside the man who had seemed so impenetrable at first. That night, as the castle slept under the quiet watch of the stars, Varian entered her chambers. The fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across the walls, and the room seemed smaller, more intimate, more alive. You have grown, he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of both observation and something unspoken. And yet, the night still holds secrets. There are truths I cannot show in daylight, lessons that come only when the world is quiet and the heart is open. Elara felt her breath catch. She did not know what he meant, yet she sensed the gravity of his words. The tension between them, the unspoken bond, had deepened in ways she could neither name nor resist. Varian, she began, but he silenced her with a look. Patience, he said, his voice low and commanding. There is a time for all revelations. Tonight, you will see what I do not show to others. You will understand why the world fears what it does not know, and why power lies not in strength alone, but in the mind and heart of those who dare to wield it. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the scars and shadows that told of battles fought and burdens carried. Elara felt a pull she could not resist, a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity that bound her attention entirely to him. As he left, he turned back once, his eyes meeting hers. Be ready, Lady Elara. The night will teach you truths that will change everything you thought you knew. Alone, she sat by the fire, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear, fascination, and anticipation. The kingdom, the throne, and the man beside her were all pieces of a puzzle she had only begun to understand. And somewhere deep inside, she realized that her life once confined by duty and fear was now expanding into something far greater, far more complex, and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The night stretched on, filled with shadows and secrets. Elara knew that her journey with Varian was only beginning, that the lessons of the mind, heart, and soul had only just begun to unfold. And she waited, tense and eager, for the revelation that he had promised the moment when the Alpha King would show her the truths hidden beneath the surface of Eldoria and beneath the surface of himself. The castle of Eldoria was quiet, yet beneath the stillness, a storm of tension brewed. Rumors of rebellion had spread throughout the kingdom, and scouts reported movements of armed men gathering at the borders. Elara stood by the tall windows of her chamber, watching the morning light reflect off the towers and walls. She had grown stronger, more aware, more certain of herself, yet a small part of her heart still trembled at the weight of the unknown. Varian entered silently, his staff in hand, his expression unreadable. He moved to stand beside her, and for a moment, they watched the horizon together. The calm he radiated was not an absence of fear but a mastery of it, a quiet authority that filled the space around him. "They approach," he said simply. "But this is the moment we have been preparing for. The night's lessons, the days of observation, they all lead here." Elara felt her pulse quicken. She had studied maps, learned to read the signs of battle, and observed Varian's strategies. She realized now that her fear had transformed into something else: determination, courage, and the understanding that she could stand beside him, not behind him. Together, they descended to the War Council. The room buzzed with anticipation. Advisors and generals whispering plans and doubts. Varian traced the movements of the enemy on the maps with calm precision, while Elara listened, offering insight when her observations suggested a better approach. "You have grown," Varian said softly, just for her to hear. "Your mind sees what others miss, and your heart knows what others fear to acknowledge. That is why you are here with me, not as a bystander, but as a partner." Elara felt warmth rise in her chest. She had not imagined she would come to value his guidance, his lessons, or his presence. Yet now, she could not imagine the kingdom without him or herself beside him. The army marched to meet the threat. From the high towers of Eldoria, the horizon burned with the dust of advancing soldiers. Varian, despite his disability, directed the battle with a clarity that was almost supernatural. He gave orders that accounted for every possible movement, every hidden threat, and every advantage they could seize. Elara stayed by his side, relaying messages, observing the flow of battle, and offering counsel when small decisions could make the difference between life and death. The danger was real, yet she felt a strange thrill, a sense of purpose that her previous life had never offered. She realized that she was no longer the frightened girl who had been brought to the castle by her stepmother's schemes. She was a queen in her own right, and a partner to a king who had once seemed untouchable. As the day waned, a critical moment arrived. A band of enemy soldiers had breached one of the outer walls. Panic rippled through the defenders, and for the first time, Elara saw fear flash across the faces of those around her. Yet Varian's presence steadied them. He gave precise instructions, moving through the chaos with measured steps, and his calm determination inspired those who fought alongside him. Elara took a deep breath and spoke up, offering a strategy that she had devised from careful observation. "If we flank their right side and draw their attention with the archers, we can contain the breach and minimize our losses," she said. Varian looked at her, his eyes narrowing in consideration. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You are right," he said. "Do it." The plan was executed flawlessly. The breach was contained. The enemy forces scattered, and the castle remained secure. Cheers rose from the soldiers, yet Varian remained calm, already thinking of the next steps, already analyzing what had gone well and what had gone wrong. Later that evening, when the last of the enemy forces had retreated, Elara found herself in the quiet of the throne room. The fire burned low, casting shadows across the walls, and she felt the exhaustion of the day settle into her bones. Varian entered, leaning on his staff, yet moving with the same quiet authority that had guided them through the battle. "You were extraordinary today," he said, his voice low but full of admiration. "You did not just follow, you led. You saw what needed to be done, and you acted with courage. That is what makes you remarkable." Elara's heart raced. Praise from Varian was rare, and it carried weight beyond any words of the court. She realized that he had always seen her potential, even when she doubted herself. His guidance had shaped her, yes, but it was her own strength and choices that had carried the day. Varian stepped closer, the firelight dancing across the scarred lines of his face. "The night comes with revelation," he said quietly. "Do you wish to see it?" Quote, Ilara nodded, a mixture of fear and anticipation threading her voice. He led her to a secluded chamber, one she had never entered before. The walls were lined with ancient tomes, scrolls, and artifacts of Eldoria's history. In the center of the room stood a large mirror, framed with silver and etched with runes. The air was heavy with magic, the same quiet force that hummed through the castle itself. This mirror shows not just what is, Varian explained, but what could be, what is hidden, and what is feared. Look into it, and you will see truths you cannot ignore. Look. Ilara approached cautiously. As she gazed into the glass, her reflection shimmered and shifted. She saw herself, yes, but also visions of the kingdom, of the battles, of the choices she had made and would make. She saw Varian not just the Alpha King, but the man who had been shaped by pain, loss, and unwavering resolve. Tears blurred her vision as she realized the depth of what he carried, the loneliness, the burden of leadership, and the courage it took to wield power without letting it consume him. She understood why he had moved with such measured calm, why he had taught her to see, to observe, to act with both heart and mind. Varian stood beside her, his hand lightly brushing hers. The world fears what it does not understand, he said softly. And yet, you have begun to understand. That is why I brought you here, not just as a bride, but as someone who can see, who can endure, who can rise above fear. Ilara turned to him, her eyes wide. I understand now. Not just the kingdom, not just you, but myself. I see my own strength, and I know what I am capable of. He nodded, a rare smile flickering across his face. Good. That understanding is more powerful than any sword, more enduring than any army. You have grown into someone I can trust, someone I can rely on not because of duty, but because of choice. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Ilara felt a bond that went beyond duty, beyond fear, beyond obligation. She realized that in Varian, she had found a partner who could see her for who she truly was, and who would not demand obedience, but understanding and trust. As the night deepened, Varian placed his hand on hers again, a gesture of connection, not command. Tonight marks the beginning of a new chapter, he said quietly. A chapter where the past does not define us, and the future is ours to shape together. Ilara's heart swelled with a mixture of relief, admiration, and something deeper she could not yet name. She had entered the castle as a frightened bride, forced into a marriage she had not chosen. But now, she stood beside a king who was more than his legends, more than his disability, more than the fears of the court. He was a man who could see, understand, and respect her in ways that few ever could. The fire burned low, the castle quiet, and the night seemed to hold its breath as they stood together. The trials of duty, rebellion, and expectation had forged something between them, something stronger than fear, something deeper than respect. Something that whispered of trust, connection, and the possibility of love. Varian's voice broke the silence one last time, low and certain. What I have done, what I am, you have made it whole. Ilara's breath caught, her mind and heart racing. She knew the journey was far from over, that the kingdom would always hold dangers and challenges, but she also knew that she had found something unshakable. A bond forged in shadow and fire, in fear and understanding, in respect and trust. And as dawn crept over Eldoria, spilling light across the towers and walls, Ilara realized that the life she had once dreaded had become something she could embrace. She was no longer just a bride forced into a marriage. She was a partner, a queen, and a woman who had discovered her own strength alongside a king who had finally shown her his truth. In the quiet of the throne room, in the soft glow of the fire, and in the space between two hearts bound by fate and understanding, the Alpha King and his queen began the next chapter of their story together, unbroken, and ready for whatever the world would bring.